Good evening and welcome to your Sunday Newswatch update. These past few days have seen an additional 9 COVID cases following a lull of a week in which there were no new confirmed infections. Speaking at today's press conference, Minister for Public Health, Dr. John Cortes, confirmed that he'd had a second virtual meeting with world expert in infectious disease, Professor David Heyman. Professor Heyman, a former senior WHO executive who led the global response to SARS, was reportedly complimentary about Gibraltar and the successful steps taken so far to contain the virus. Meanwhile, Civil Contingencies Coordinator Ivor Lopez provided an update on what he called the exceptional work being done by the different groups and agencies these past few months in preparing Gibraltar for the pandemic.
Today marked 41 consecutive 4 p.m. updates by the government, including the Easter messages by the Chief Minister and Governor. Dr. Cortes gave a rundown of the current statistics, noting an increase of 9 cases over the past few days.
At Accident and Emergency in St. Bernard's Hospital, in the 24 hours to 8:30 this morning, there were 26 attendances. Of these, only 4 were of persons with COVID symptoms. All 4 were swabbed, but there was no need for any admissions to either of the COVID wards, John Ward or the COVID CCU. In relation to hospital, there are no patients in the COVID John Ward. There is 1 in COVID critical care unit, but it's a patient who has since tested negative and so will be moved. So there are no COVID patients currently in our hospitals. The latest test results are not quite as reassuring. Total swabs, 2,198, pending 82, results received 2,116, and confirmed 141 cases, active 10, recovered 131. This represents an additional 9 positives in a week after a lull of about a week with no increase. While these are clearly still not massive numbers, and certainly nothing to panic about, they do act as a sobering reminder that the virus is out there still.
Dr. Cortes said that together with Minister for Health Paul Balban, Acting Medical Director Dr. Krish Rawal and Public Health Director Dr. Suhail Bhatti, a second video conference meeting was held with the world expert in infectious diseases, Professor David Heyman. The professor is a former World Health Organization executive. He led the global response to SARS and is currently Professor of Infectious Diseases at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Dr. Cortes said they discussed current developments and Gibraltar's strategy.
Professor Heyman was complimentary about the steps that we've taken in Gibraltar and our successful strategy so far. Like we do regularly, he warned about complacency and stressed that we need to keep reminding ourselves of the danger that this virus still poses. This is something that the government has very much in mind as it discusses and considers next steps. Rest assured that every aspect is being considered based on public health advice and conscious of the need of getting our lives and our economy back on track as soon as it is safe to do so.
Dr. Cortes said that in his department, the Ministry for Culture, they've already been looking at reopening areas they've been pausing, such as museums, libraries and exhibitions, adding they'll be speaking to dance schools in the coming weeks. In answer to GBC questions as to what the government's exit strategy from lockdown will be, Dr. Cortes was emphatic.
Okay, I think that it's clear. I mean, whenever I get the daily results, I want them to be as low as possible. So I think that our strategy must be keeping numbers low. How we develop our lockdown policy will take that into account. We know how to trap it. We know how we can stop the virus. We've been quite successful so far. Let's keep on at that. So that is the strategy at the moment.
Civil Contingencies Coordinator Ivor Lopez gave a summary of all the work done by the various agencies in getting Gibraltar ready for the pandemic. He repeated the FCO's travel advice for Spain, that people should not move from Gibraltar into Spain unless they hold residency there. This, he said, had also been tightened up. Mr Lopez also paid tribute to the work being done by the vulnerable group team in supporting not only the elderly, but also children, the homeless and those at risk of domestic abuse.
And the teams under Dean Castry have been able to support over 279 requests for 110 vulnerable families. And that has meant daily engagement with them, making sure that they are receiving the goods and the items that they do. And again, I congratulate the team for working so hard in making sure that the most vulnerable of our society are supported.
Ivor Lopez also remarked on the work being done by the Environmental Agency in ensuring food supplies continue to flow across the border and also in areas such as the cemetery and waste management.
They have been very much engaged in making sure that food supplies continue unhindered, and that has meant engagement almost daily with all the food suppliers, whether those are the supermarkets or the wholesalers, and that engagement has really started since late January or early February and really continues. And the fact that our shelves continue to be full, as we all know, I think just shows the work that they have been able to carry out and how useful that has been. Another area of the Ministry of Environment has been about increasing the cemetery capacity, and they have actually done great work in making sure that we are able to receive further demand over there if it is required.
Dr Cortés said it was too soon to resume funerals, but in a positive note, he said we can beat this. The better we follow official advice, the sooner we can get out to live a more normal life, and the less likely it will be that we'll have to reverse.
Spain hopes to start a major de-escalation of restrictions on the 10th of May, although this is not expected to be applied equally across the country. In a briefing yesterday, Pedro Sánchez said de-escalation will be gradual and will depend on where people live, as the incidence of coronavirus has differed among regions. The number of deaths across the country has fallen to the lowest levels recorded since the 20th of March.
Pedro Sánchez said that not everywhere will advance at the same speed, but stressed the same rules will apply to everyone. Speaking over the weekend, the Spanish Premier said, "We went in this together and we will leave it together as a country, as a team, even if we do so at different speeds." He announced people will be able to exercise and take walks as from next Saturday. As from today, for the first time in 42 days, children will be allowed out for an hour each day. Testing to see how many people have contracted the virus, a key factor in de-escalation, has been constantly delayed, but is due to start tomorrow at the earliest and last for 8 weeks. Although it's hoped that people will be able to leave their homes in 3 weeks' time, there are warnings of a return of restrictive measures in Spain if there's a new spike in cases. The number of recovered cases there now exceeds the number of active ones, something described by Mr. Sánchez as a modest victory. Spain's de-escalation plan will be presented on Tuesday after approval by the Spanish cabinet. Meanwhile, economic measures for both businesses and individuals unable to carry on operating or working are to be introduced in La Línea. Residents will be able to apply for subsidies and exemptions for their water bills for the rest of the year.
And the latest news is that the president of the Andalusian government, Juanma Moreno, has this afternoon proposed for retail to reopen on the 11th of May, with pubs and restaurants on the 25th. The Andalusian government, like most autonomous regions, has submitted their own localised plans and timelines for de-escalation to the Spanish government. And Boris Johnson will return to work tomorrow and resume his normal schedule 2 weeks after leaving hospital to continue his recovery from COVID-19. The Prime Minister is said to be raring to go as he is set to rejoin his Downing Street colleagues next week. Despite recuperating at his weekend retreat in Chequers, Mr. Johnson has reportedly held Zoom meetings in which he has been updated on the progress being made in the UK's battle against the coronavirus, as well as being briefed on the policy work carried out on easing lockdown measures. Meanwhile, Dominic Raab, who has been filling in for the Prime Minister in his absence, stressed that this is a delicate, dangerous time. The Foreign Secretary said the public must accept the new normal of tough restrictions lasting for many months, and warned that a vaccine is unlikely before the end of the year. The EU's chief negotiator claims the UK has failed to engage substantially on the difficult issues in Brexit talks held this week. Michel Barnier also accused the British government of going back on commitments made in writing before the exit. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the UK government admitted that limited progress was made in bridging the gaps with the EU.
Brexit talks restarted on Monday via video talks after a delay because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Both sides are trying to strike a free trade deal by the end of the year to prevent the UK crashing out of the single market on World Trade Organization terms, which it is believed will cause significant economic damage. The sticking points are the same ones: adherence to the European Convention on Human Rights and fisheries. Mr. Barnier said the EU cannot accept selective progress, adding there has to be progress on all issues in parallel. A solution, he said, needs to be found for the difficult issues too. Mr. Barnier argued the UK cannot refuse to extend the transition and, at the same time, slow down discussions on important areas. The reality of the negotiations, he said, was to find best possible solutions for 66 million consumers on one side of the channel and 450 million on the other. The UK has till June to extend the transition period, July for reaching a deal on fisheries, and December for negotiating a trade agreement and also fully implementing the deal to solve the Irish border, approved last year. A UK government spokesperson described the talks as full and constructive, but admitted that limited progress was made in bridging the gaps with the EU. He added there were significant differences of principle in other areas, including fisheries, regulations and governance. Talks restart on the 11th of May, with neither side discarding a no deal.
The Liberian-flagged bulk carrier Captain Tassos D called into Gibraltar yesterday with one crew member suffering from a severe medical condition which required immediate medical attention. The Port Authority, the ambulance service and college clinic were all involved as the Admiral Rook launch was deployed with paramedics and a doctor to perform the necessary checks on board the vessel and prepare the crew member to disembark. However, the Port Authority has stressed that this crew member had no COVID-19 symptoms, but regardless, all precautions and checks were made before transporting him to St. Bernard's Hospital for further medical examination. And before we go tonight, our top story once again. The government says the past few days have seen an additional 9 COVID cases following a lull of a week in which there were no new confirmed infections. Speaking at today's press conference, Minister for Public Health Dr. John Cortes said infectious disease expert Professor David Heyman, a former World Health Organization executive, had been complimentary about Gibraltar and the successful steps taken so far to contain the virus on the rock. Minister Cortes also revealed the government is working on a plan for easing lockdown measures, which includes ways of reopening the museum, the library, spaces for dance groups and other cultural areas. These, he said, would have to be gradual. For his part, Civil Contingencies Coordinator Ivo Lopez praised the various groups and agencies who, he said, had done exceptional work in preparing Gibraltar for the pandemic. That's all from the news team. Good night. We leave you with these incredible images of griffon vultures spotted flying over the rock as they head back north from Africa.